He moved like lightning, a man who seemed untouchable. Yet, behind the legend of Bruce Lee lies a shadow. His death at just 32 shocked the world. Was it fate? Was it sabotage? Or something far darker? Tonight, we step into the mystery that refuses to die. The story of Bruce Lee does not begin in Hollywood, but far from it, in the humid shadows of San Francisco's Chinatown. Born in 1940, in the year of the dragon, his life already carried the weight of mythology. The world knew him as a fighter, a philosopher, a movie star. But before the blazing lights and roaring crowds, he was simply a boy named Li Junfan, a child marked by destiny. His father was a well-known opera performer, his mother from a lineage of mixed Chinese and European ancestry. And from the very beginning, Bruce seemed to straddle two worlds, never entirely belonging to one or the other. As a child, he was restless, sharp, and endlessly curious. In Hong Kong, where his family eventually settled, Bruce became known not only for his charm, but also for his temper. He fought in the streets, not for glory, but for survival. Those who crossed him learned quickly that his fists were fast and his will even faster. Yet beyond the violence, there was something magnetic about him, a presence that drew people in. The camera first found him as a child actor, giving him a taste of the screen long before he would conquer it. But the streets left their mark on him too, and by his teenage years, he had been drawn to Wing Chun, the martial art that would shape his body and philosophy alike. Under the guidance of IP Man, Bruce's raw energy began to sharpen into something dangerous, something precise. He trained obsessively, moving with the kind of intensity that others could not match. Friends would recall how he never seemed to rest, as though even then he sensed his time on Earth would be brief. Every punch, every kick, every movement carried urgency, as if he were already fighting against the clock. But Hong Kong was too small for Bruce Lee. Trouble seemed to follow him in the form of rival gangs and jealous fighters. His parents, fearful that his hot temper might end with his death on the streets, sent him back to America, to the country of his birth. The journey across the ocean was the beginning of his transformation. The boy would become a myth, though he could not yet see it. In Seattle, he studied, worked in restaurants, and began teaching martial arts to anyone willing to learn. What set him apart was not just his skill, but his vision. Bruce did not believe in the rigid traditions of style versus style. He believed in adaptability, in freedom, in creating something fluid. His philosophy was simple, yet profound. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. This way of thinking threatened traditionalists, but attracted outsiders, and soon his name began to spread. He was not simply teaching fighting. He was teaching a way of life. Hollywood, however, was not ready. Bruce dreamed of starring in films, of bringing Chinese martial arts to the world stage, but he was met with closed doors. Racism was rampant, and leading roles were reserved for others. He was offered small parts, the chance to play stereotypes, but never the chance to be the star he knew he could be. Yet Bruce Lee was not a man who accepted limits. He worked harder, trained longer, and with every rejection, his determination grew sharper. It was in television, with his role as Kato in The Green Hornet, that America first caught a glimpse of his lightning speed and magnetic presence. But even then, the show was canceled after one season, and Bruce was left wondering if he would ever get the chance to break through. Friends remember him growing restless, pacing rooms, sketching ideas for films that no one seemed willing to fund. Yet behind his frustration burned a certainty. He was destined for more. When he returned to Hong Kong in the early 1970s, everything changed. There, he was not a rejected foreigner, but a conquering hero. His films exploded at the box office, breaking records, igniting audiences, and elevating martial arts to a new level of popularity. Suddenly, Bruce Lee was more than a star. He was a phenomenon. His body moved like no one else's, a blur of precision and power. His charisma lit the screen, and his philosophy resonated with millions who had never set foot in a dojo. But even as his fame soared, shadows gathered. Those close to him spoke of his exhaustion, of the intensity with which he trained, of the way he seemed to push himself beyond normal limits. He was often drenched in sweat, his body trembling after hours of relentless practice. Friends begged him to rest, but Bruce would only smile and push harder. His body was a weapon, he said, and weapons must be honed every day. Still, there were whispers of collapse, of sudden seizures, of unexplained fainting spells. In interviews, Bruce spoke with fiery conviction, but there was something else too, something fragile hiding in the corners of his words. He spoke of time, of legacy, of wanting to live a life so full that it would echo beyond his years. To some, it sounded like ambition. To others, like prophecy. Hollywood eventually came calling again, this time willing to give him the leading roles he deserved. Enter the Dragon, his first major Hollywood film, was set to make him an international superstar, bridging East and West in a way no one before him had done. But as the cameras rolled, Bruce's health seemed to falter. On set, he would sometimes collapse, his body betraying the force of his will. Doctors gave reassurances, but those who saw him began to worry. His wife Linda recalled nights when he would wake drenched in sweat, his heart racing as if chased by unseen enemies. Still, he pressed forward, determined to finish what he had started. His energy was unyielding, his drive unstoppable. Yet the shadows crept closer, whispering warnings no one could decipher. And then, in July of 1973, as the world waited eagerly for his Hollywood debut, Bruce Lee walked into a friend's apartment in Hong Kong, complaining of a headache. He'd lay down to rest, never to rise again. At just 32 years old, the Dragon fell silent, and the mystery began. But how could a man so powerful, so disciplined, so alive, be gone in an instant? What truly happened in that room? Was it a tragic accident, a medical oversight, or something far darker? The questions began that night, and they have never stopped. The story of Bruce Lee's death would spiral into conspiracies of curses, assassinations, and family legacies stained with tragedy. And as investigators looked deeper, what they found only raised more questions than answers, because Bruce Lee's death was not just the end of a life. It was the birth of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The world had never seen someone like Bruce Lee. By the early 1970s, his name was etched into the consciousness of audiences across continents. Hollywood, which had once dismissed him, was now forced to reckon with the firestorm he created. But beneath the surface of triumph, there were cracks, faint whispers of tension, secrets, and shadows that began to swirl around his meteoric rise. Bruce's training was obsessive, borderline punishing. He believed his body was a vessel that had to be sculpted to perfection, but his devotion bordered on the extreme. He pushed himself past exhaustion, past pain, past the warning signs most men would heed. His wife, Linda, would later recount nights when Bruce lay awake, unable to sleep, drenched in sweat from his endless routines. He treated sleep as an obstacle, rest as an enemy, and weakness as an insult to his very existence. Yet the more he pushed, the more the world noticed. Films like The Big Boss and Fist of Fury shattered box office records in Asia. Audiences screamed his name, imitating his sharp cries and lightning-fast movements. His presence on screen was otherworldly, not simply an actor, but a storm contained in human form. For every studio executive who once turned him away, there were now 10 who wanted to cash in on the legend he was creating. But success came with enemies. Rival martial artists challenged him, whispering that he had betrayed the traditions of Kung Fu by teaching non-Chinese students. Old masters accused him of selling their secrets to outsiders. Anonymous letters arrived, threatening his life if he continued. Bruce brushed it off, but Linda noticed his growing paranoia, his watchful eyes scanning crowds, his tense silences that hinted at battles far beyond the screen. Then there was Hollywood, always hungry, always ready to take control. Warner Bros. Saw dollar signs in his blazing charisma, but they also saw someone they could not fully tame. Bruce wanted more than roles. He wanted to reshape the very image of Asians in cinema, to tear down the stereotypes and rebuild them with truth, power, and dignity. But that vision clashed with the industry's greed, and soon, boardroom politics became a battlefield. Bruce stood alone, unflinching, but surrounded by wolves. Friends later recalled strange encounters. Bruce confided in some that he felt watched, that there were forces trying to hold him back. He once told a close associate that he dreamed of a shadow chasing him, a faceless figure that he could never outrun. Superstition ran deep in his culture, and whispers of a family curse haunted him. His father, Lee Hoi-chun, had faced misfortune and early illness. Bruce's own son, Brandon, would later fall to tragedy in a chilling echo. It was as if destiny had written danger into the margins of the Lee bloodline. In Hong Kong, rumors spread that Bruce had crossed powerful figures. Triads, the secretive criminal syndicates, were said to have resented his refusal to cooperate, his independence, his unwillingness to bow. Some claimed he was approached for protection money, others that he refused to let them control his films. Whether truth or exaggeration, the whispers never stopped. And in Bruce's world, whispers often carried deadly weight. The summer of 1973 was a turning point. Bruce had just completed Enter the Dragon, the film that would finally catapult him into Hollywood's global stage. The premiere was set, the world was waiting, and Bruce was only 32 years old. His name was on posters across continents, his image larger than life. He was standing on the edge of immortality, but at the same time, his body began betraying him. He collapsed in May, convulsing, foaming at the mouth, his muscles seizing as if his own strength had turned against him. Doctors rushed him to the hospital, diagnosing cerebral edema, dangerous swelling in the brain. He survived, barely, but those who saw him during those days said he looked haunted, fragile, as though a shadow hung over him. Bruce dismissed the warnings. He claimed it was exhaustion, a side effect of the burden he carried. He returned to work, more determined than ever, convinced that destiny could not slow him down. But Linda feared the truth, that something deeper, darker, was at play. And then came July 20th, 1973, the day the world stopped. Bruce was an actress, Betty Ting Pei's apartment in Hong Kong, reviewing scripts for his next project. He complained of a headache. Betty offered him a common painkiller, Equagesic, a blend of aspirin and tranquilizer. Bruce lay down to rest. Hours later, he would never wake again. Officially, the cause was the same diagnosis as before, cerebral edema. But for millions around the world, the explanation was too neat, too convenient. How could the strongest man alive, the picture of vitality, collapse after a simple pill? Why were there inconsistencies in the story? Gaps in the timeline, whispers of missing details? And why was his death shrouded in silence, as though those closest to him knew more than they dared say? The legend of Bruce Lee, the man who could not be defeated in life, suddenly transformed into a mystery in death. And the world was left with questions that still echo today. But the deeper one looks, the stranger the puzzle becomes. Because the story of Bruce Lee's death may not be just about medicine, or fate, or chance. It may be about forces far larger, far darker than anyone was willing to admit. And when investigators and biographers began digging, they uncovered connections threads that led to conspiracies involving the film industry, criminal networks, and even hints of a curse that had stalked the Lee family for generations. The story does not end here. In fact, this is where it begins to unravel into something far more unsettling. Because Bruce Lee's final hours may not be as they seemed, and the truth waiting in the shadows may be darker than anyone dared imagine. The news hit like an earthquake. Bruce Lee was dead. 32 years old, at the height of his power, a man who seemed invincible. Within hours, headlines spread across Hong Kong, across Asia, and then across the globe. Fans wept in the streets, lining outside his home, leaving flowers, incense, and prayers. Crowds surged so heavily during his funeral that the police struggled to keep order. To his people, Bruce wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol, a hero, the embodiment of strength and pride. And now, in an instant, he was gone. But almost immediately, doubt crept in. The official report said cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. Doctors said it could have been a reaction to medication, a tragic accident. Yet something about the explanation felt incomplete, like a page torn out of a book. How could a man who trained his body with such precision, who treated his health as sacred, collapse so suddenly after taking a simple pill? The inconsistencies piled up quickly. Witnesses gave conflicting timelines. Some claimed Bruce complained of headaches for weeks. Others swore he was perfectly fine until that fateful afternoon. Even stranger was the setting of his death, Betty Tingpei's apartment. Why was he there? Why did hours pass before the hospital was alerted? Why did the initial report avoid mentioning her name at all? To the public, the omission looked deliberate, like someone wanted to control the narrative. Then came the theories wild, sensational, but impossible to ignore. Some said Bruce was poisoned, silenced by jealous rivals in the film industry. Others whispered of the triads, furious at Bruce's independence, exacting revenge for his refusal to cooperate. A few pointed to shadowy Hollywood executives, men who feared Bruce's growing power and influence in an industry that had long been built on stereotypes he was destroying. Was his death simply too convenient for too many powerful people? But the most chilling whispers circled around the idea of a curse. Bruce himself had mentioned it half joking, half serious. The Lee family, some said, was doomed to tragedy. His brother had died in infancy. Bruce's father had been plagued with misfortune. And now Bruce, in his prime, was cut down by forces no one could see. Years later, his son Brandon would fall to a freak accident on a movie set, killed by a bullet that should have been a blank. To those who believed in destiny, the pattern was undeniable. To others, it was evidence that something unnatural was at work, a shadow stalking the family through generations. Investigators dug deeper, but the more they uncovered, the murkier the story became. Medical reports contradicted one another. Witness testimony shifted. It was as if a veil had been pulled over the truth. Some journalists claimed they were pressured to drop their inquiries, threatened when they pushed too far. Friends of Bruce spoke of conversations they had with him in the weeks leading up to his death. Conversations about being followed, about enemies who wanted to see him fail, about dreams of death that haunted his nights. One chilling detail often overlooked. Bruce once told a confidant that he did not believe he would live to see old age. It was a prophecy, a whisper of fate that seemed to come true with eerie precision. And yet, questions linger. Was Bruce's death the result of medical negligence? A reaction to a pill that didn't agree with his body? Or was it something far darker, murder disguised as misfortune, a conspiracy buried beneath headlines, or the fulfillment of a curse that defied reason? As the years passed, the mystery only grew. His films became immortal, his image a symbol of defiance, and his philosophy a guiding flame for millions. But behind the legend, the unanswered questions remain, echoing like an unsolved riddle carved into history. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this: the closer one looks into the final days of Bruce Lee, the more the story begins to unravel into something that feels less like coincidence and more like a carefully orchestrated silence. Because the man who was never defeated in life may have been defeated by something no one could see, something that may still be watching, waiting, lingering in the shadows of Hollywood, Hong Kong, and beyond. But this story is not over. Because to truly understand the mystery of Bruce Lee, one must look not only at his death, but at the forces that profited from it, and that leads us into far darker places. The days after Bruce Lee's death were soaked in grief and confusion. His funeral in Hong Kong drew tens of thousands, a sea of mourners pressing against barricades, crying out the name of the man who had become their hero. Police struggled to hold back the crowds as his coffin, carried by friends and colleagues, became almost impossible to move. Inside that casket lay not just a man, but a legend abruptly silenced. And yet, silence was not what followed. Instead, a storm erupted with questions, rumors, suspicion swirling with every passing hour. Official reports named cerebral edema, brain swelling, likely caused by a reaction to a prescription painkiller. But for many, this explanation was far too neat, too convenient. How could the man who embodied vitality, who spent every waking moment sculpting his body into a weapon of strength and discipline, die so suddenly from something so mundane? The public wanted answers, but what they got was confusion. His death, instead of closing a chapter, opened countless more. Newspapers speculated endlessly. Radio programs buzzed with callers, insisting there was more to the story. In tea houses and dark alleys, whispers carried tales of poison, of betrayal, of debts unpaid and revenge extracted. The Triads, Hong Kong's powerful underworld, were named by some. Hollywood executives, threatened by Bruce's rise as a global star who defied stereotypes, were named by others. And then there were the whispers of the supernatural, the belief that Bruce had been cursed, that no man, no matter how strong, could escape fate. It did not end with him. Nearly 20 years later, the eerie shadow returned. Brandon Lee, Bruce's only son, stepped into the spotlight. A rising actor, Brandon had inherited his father's charisma, his intensity, his undeniable presence on screen. But in 1993, while filming The Crow, tragedy struck. A scene that should have used harmless blanks somehow turned deadly. A real bullet lodged in the prop gun fired into his body. Brandon collapsed, never to rise again. He was just 28. The parallels were chilling. A father and a son, both lost at the cusp of greatness, both to sudden, inexplicable circumstances. The world began to whisper once more about the Lee family curse. Skeptics dismissed it, insisting coincidence, negligence, or bad luck explained it. Yet for many, it was proof that something far darker haunted the bloodline, something that had claimed Bruce and now Brandon, and perhaps would not stop there. But why? Who would wish such a fate upon them? Theories multiplied like shadows. Some said Bruce had uncovered secrets too great, had threatened powers too vast, and paid the price. Others believed he had tapped into spiritual realms, dabbled in energies mankind was not meant to wield. A few whispered that Bruce's refusal to bow, his fierce independence, made him a target for those who preferred obedience over brilliance. Through it all, the truth remained out of reach, buried under contradictions and silence. Witnesses changed their stories. Files disappeared. Those who pressed too hard were discouraged, sometimes threatened into stepping away. The mystery hardened into legend, and legend into myth. And yet, Bruce Lee's legacy refused to die. His films became immortal, his words quoted like scripture, his image painted on walls, stitched into clothing, etched into the minds of generations who never even saw him alive. He became more than a man, he became an idea. An idea that one could break boundaries, defy limitations, rise above prejudice and doubt. But behind that idea still lies the shadow, the haunting riddle of why his flame burned out so soon, why his sun's light was extinguished in almost the same way. It is a story without an ending, because the ending was never written. What remains is an unsolved puzzle, a silence that echoes louder than any answer. Was Bruce Lee simply a victim of chance? Or was he taken by forces that feared that he was becoming something larger than life, something unstoppable? Perhaps the truth was hidden long ago, locked away by those who understood that legends grow stronger in mystery. Perhaps Bruce's death was never meant to be solved, only whispered about, fueling the myth until the man became untouchable. And so, decades later, the question lingers in the air like smoke. Did Bruce Lee die of fate, of folly, or of something far darker? A question with no answer, only an echo that refuses to fade. Because sometimes, legends don't end. Sometimes they are stolen, and sometimes they are silenced. The cameras rolled on a dimly lit set in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was 1993, and Brandon Lee was stepping into the role that would define him. The Crow was meant to be his breakthrough, the film that would catapult him beyond his father's shadow and cement his place in Hollywood as a star in his own right. On screen, Brandon was mesmerizing. Off screen, he carried a quiet charm, a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his roles. To many who worked with him, Brandon was more than just Bruce Lee's son. He was an artist in his own right, someone with the potential to reshape Hollywood the way his father once had. But fate had other plans. On March 31st, during a late-night shoot, Brandon walked onto set to film a scene where his character is shot. The prop gun was supposed to fire blanks loud, dramatic, but harmless. Instead, when the trigger was pulled, something went horribly wrong. A fragment of a real bullet, lodged in the barrel from a botched preparation, was propelled by the blank cartridge with lethal force. It pierced Brandon's abdomen. At first, the crew thought his fall was part of the act. But as seconds turned into minutes, the horror sank in. He wasn't acting. He was dying. Rushed to the hospital, doctors fought for hours to save him. But just like his father before him, Brandon's life ended too soon, too suddenly. He was only 28. The world gasped in disbelief. How could such an impossible accident happen in Hollywood, a place where safety was supposedly paramount? And how, of all people, could this happen to the son of Bruce Lee, a man whose own death had been shrouded in mystery? The parallels were chilling. Both father and son, men in their prime, icons on the rise, cut down before their stories could fully unfold. Both deaths are surrounded by confusion, contradictions, and whispers of conspiracy. To many, it was not coincidence. It was the curse. But was it truly a curse, or something else entirely? Some said Brandon's death was nothing more than negligence, a tragic accident born from sloppy preparation and cost-cutting on set. Yet others saw more. Rumors swirled that someone tampered with the gun deliberately, that forces behind the scenes wanted Brandon silenced before he became too powerful, just as they claimed had happened to his father. Theories spread like wildfire. The Triads had returned to finish what they started. Hollywood elites feared the Lee family's rising influence. Some even whispered of a hidden hand destiny itself, dragging the family into a cycle of tragedy that could not be broken. Friends of the family recalled eerie stories. Bruce, in his final months, had spoken of death, of shadows following him. Brandon, too, had shared his unease, confessing once that he felt his life might end before he could truly live. His role in The Crow only deepened the unease. He played a man murdered before his wedding day, who rises from the grave to seek vengeance. Art imitated life with terrifying accuracy, and life in turn seemed to echo art. At the funeral, Brandon was laid to rest beside his father in Seattle, their graves side by side. Two names etched into stone, two lives cut short, two legends forever intertwined. For the fans who stood in silence, tears streaming, the image was unbearable. A father and son united in death, both stolen too soon. And yet, the story did not end there. Because the questions around Brandon's death refused to fade. How could a real bullet fragment remain inside a prop gun without anyone noticing? Why were safety protocols so carelessly ignored? Why, in an industry so careful, did this one mistake prove fatal at the exact moment it mattered most? Some said it was incompetence. Others believed it was intentional. But whatever the truth, the result was the same. Another Lee, another tragedy, another mystery carved into Hollywood's dark history. For the Lee family, grief became a shadow that never lifted. Linda, Bruce's widow, had lost not only her husband, but now her only son. Shannon, Brandon's sister, was left to carry the weight of a family haunted by loss. And as years passed, the theory of a curse grew stronger. Was it superstition? Or was there truly something inescapable? Something ancient and relentless stalking the Lee bloodline? And so the legend deepened. Bruce and Brandon, father and son, bound by love, bound by legacy, bound by tragedy. Two fallen stars whose death seemed less like accidents and more like pieces of a riddle no one could solve. But if the curse was real, if unseen forces truly hunted the Lees, then the final question remains: why? Why them? Why this family? Why, across decades and continents, did fate return to claim them both? The answers, if they exist, lie not just in the deaths of Bruce and Brandon, but in the long shadows of history, in secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. And those shadows are where we must go next. The graves of Bruce and Brandon Lee sit quietly in Seattle, side by side, a father and son bound forever by tragedy. Visitors from around the world leave flowers, incense, and handwritten notes. Some kneel in silence, others whisper prayers. A few even confess that they do not come to honor, but to seek answers, as if by standing at their graves, they might feel some fragment of the mystery that has haunted the Lee family for decades. The story of Bruce and Brandon has become more than history. It has become legend. The legends do not rise from nothing. They grow from unanswered questions, and the Lee family has more than their share. Bruce, struck down in 1973, his death explained away as cerebral edema, yet surrounded by contradictions and suspicions. Brandon, killed in 1993, a victim of what should have been an impossible accident, yet one that seemed too strange, too precise, too cruelly poetic. Theories multiplied, each darker than the last. Some point to the Lee family curse, a tale whispered in Hong Kong long before Bruce's rise to stardom. His own father had faced misfortune and illness, and Bruce's younger brother died in infancy. In traditional superstition, families believed that angry spirits or unsettled ancestors could stalk a bloodline, bringing calamity again and again. To those who believe, the deaths of Bruce and Brandon were not accidents. They were inevitabilities. Others argue in shadows of power and control. Bruce had challenged Hollywood's system, breaking stereotypes and demanding respect for martial arts and Asian actors. Brandon was poised to continue that fight. To those with power, that influence could have been threatening. Could the Lees have been silenced not by fate, but by deliberate design? Theories of poisoning, sabotage, and hidden enemies swirl like smoke. Impossible to prove, impossible to disprove. And then there are the darker whispers, still the belief that Bruce tapped into something beyond human strength, beyond the natural. His training was legendary, his philosophy profound. Some claimed he unlocked knowledge mankind was not meant to hold. Was he punished for trespassing into forbidden realms? It sounds like superstition, but the more one stares at the pattern of his life and death, the harder it becomes to shake the unease. What makes the curse theory most chilling is not just the past, but the fear of its future. Could it strike again? Fans who visit the graves sometimes leave notes begging the curse to stop, to spare those who remain. Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter and Brandon's sister, continues to protect and honor their legacy, yet she too carries the weight of those whispers. A family stalked by fate, always looking over their shoulder. And yet, even in the face of tragedy, the Lee legacy refuses to die. Bruce Lee's philosophy, his writings, his films live on. Brandon's role in The Crow, completed with the help of body doubles and special effects, became a cult classic, a haunting final performance that ensured his name would never be forgotten. Their lives, though short, carved deep scars in culture, scars that time cannot erase. But the mystery remains. Did Bruce and Brandon fall to coincidence, to human error, to fragile biology and unfortunate accidents? Or did unseen forces, be they curses, conspiracies, or powers beyond understanding, reach out to silence them both? The truth may never be known. It lies buried in medical files, in lost testimonies, in the memories of people too afraid to speak. It lingers in old rumors, in half-forgotten interviews, in the silence of those who knew more than they ever admitted. It clings to their graves, to their films, to the myths that have grown like vines over their names. And perhaps that is the final twist of the story. That Bruce and Brandon Lee, men who fought so hard to control their destinies, became legends not just because of their lives, but because of their deaths. Legends wrapped in mystery, forever untouchable, forever unsolved. Decades later, their story still haunts Hollywood, still whispers across continents, still draws the curious, the grieving, and the conspiratorial. The world demands answers, but all it finds are echoes. And maybe that is the point, because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some stories are not meant to end. And some legends are not destroyed by death, but made eternal by it. Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee, father and son, icons, victims, myths. The question is not how they died. The question is why we are still asking. And so, the dragon never truly died. His fire burns on in questions that have no answers, in shadows that never fade. Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee, two names carved in mystery, bound by fate, remembered by legend. Their story does not end in the grave. It lingers in silence, in whispers, and in the haunting truth that some mysteries are never meant to be solved.